Hello everybody, welcome back to another election video. This time we're looking at the 2024 electoral map based on the statewide polling. So we're going to currently see who's ahead in the polls in each of these few states. But for now I'm just going to set up the safer red states. These are states that we don't even need to really cover, honestly. They're just automatically safe red to begin with. And I think we're good. Just going to set up the safe blue ones now. Again, Delaware is not going to be competitive. Let's just see if there was a poll there. You know, some people have it as likely Democratic, but I think they're just extremely biased if they have it as that way. But there has been a poll here, and it shows Harris up here by a safe blue margin like I thought she would be. Okay. Connecticut, I also seen polls out of there showing her up by a good amount. Same with Rhode Island. All right. So let's get into it. We'll start off with the first few states. New York and New Jersey. New Jersey, I believe, has not conducted a poll yet. No, it is not. So far, yeah, no polls with Harris in this race so far. They only had polls with Biden at this point. In New York, they did do some polls here, and they show Harris up by about 13 percentage points. That's a safe blue margin. It's over 10%. So New York and New Jersey are both safe Democratic states. We'll head to Montana next, and they did do polls here, a few of them with the Senate race. So far, Trump's either up by 15 or he's up by 20 points. So far, it's a very safe Republican Montana as of right now. Let's head to Kansas up next. Kansas also has not conducted polling with Harris yet. Let's see if there's anything in the other candidate section. No, there is not. So Kansas is we're just going to assume it's safe Republican as of right now. I did put Illinois as safe blue, but let's see if there's been any recent polls. No, there's only been an active vote poll, and that shows Harris leading by 16, which is a safe blue margin. We'll head to Iowa next. There has been recent polls, and we're only paying attention to the most recent polls for this polling video. But the most recent poll in Iowa is Seltzer, the widely renowned pollster here, and they have it as a lean Republican race. Trump's only ahead by 4 percentage points in Iowa, according to the polls of right now. Heading over to Nebraska second, we've seen a lot of polls here in this little district, and we do know that Harris is up here by a likely blue margin. I've seen a Survey USA poll that has her up in double digits in this district. We also have a Republican internal that says Harris is leading by 9. And I've seen other polls that have her up by 7 here. So this is a likely blue district according to the polls right now, which I was expecting. But there's some polls showing her up by double digits or nearing that margin. In Alaska, we did get a recent poll conducted here showing a likely Republican race. 5-point lead for Trump, and then a 10-point lead for Trump, but this is a Republican internal here. So currently, according to the polls, Trump's up here by about 7, which is a likely R margin. Let's head to Washington State next, and I believe they have conducted some polls recently. Yep, Harris is up by 20 in a recent poll. Elway Research, honestly, I never really heard of that pollster before, but this is pretty consistent. Again, Washington's a very blue state, so it wouldn't shock me if it goes by that margin. In Oregon, I believe they have conducted a recent poll here. Hoffman Research back in July, and that's the only poll of this race so far, and they have a unrealistic margin of Harris only winning by 5 in this state. Again, expect most of these undecideds to break Harris's way, and I don't think Trump will get close to 44% of the vote in Oregon. So I would put both Washington as safe blue and Oregon. According to that one poll, it was a likely blue margin, so it's likely blue. Heading over to Colorado, take a look. So far, Harris is up by around double digits according to these two morning consult polls. She's up by 11 or 15, which is a safe blue margin averaged out. Heading over to New Mexico, I think we could do Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. Start off with New Mexico first. And so far, the poll conducted after the convention has Harris, as expected, up by 8 percentage points, which is what I expect her to win this state by, honestly. I don't think Trump has a actual shot at making this state competitive as a swing state. Heading over to Arizona up next. Trump has a pretty dominant lead. Well, not dominant, but he's frequently led in polls in this state by a decent amount of margins here, according to all these aggregates. But so far, there was a poll that did show Harris narrowly up, but mainly if we average out most of the polls here, Trump's ahead by about 1 percentage point here, according to Wikipedia. So, and again, the other aggregates that do have Trump only below 1 is a 0.9% margin. So just averaging it out, Trump's ahead here by a lean Republican margin right now. Just barely, though. All it takes is 1 decimal to go down, and then it changes to tilt Republican. So let's do New Mexico and Arizona. Nevada is heavily trending Democratic now, according to the poll. She's keep building on that lead. We did have a recent morning consult poll that has her up by, I believe, 5 to, I think it was like 7. It might have been either 6 or 7 points. But I think this, according to the polls, is a lean blue state as of right now. Trump hasn't led here in a bit. And when he does lead, it's usually in a Republican internal. So right now, Nevada is trending for Harris. We used to be a likely R state when it was Biden in the race. But now Harris has quite a decent advantage in Nevada. Let's head over to South Carolina, and it's probably going to be a safe red state, but let's check it out. And there's no polls here, so this is just automatically assuming it's safe Republican. Texas, on the other hand, there has been some polls here conducted recently. So far, one poll's up by 5. ActiVote, honestly, I don't really consider them to be a good pollster, so I'm kind of excluding them. Again, I just don't like the way they conduct their polls. Their samples are usually garbage. So we have one poll up with Trump at 5 in Texas, another with him up at 4. So overall, if we're averaging those 2 polls out, and I guess we'll include, well, actually, no, we wouldn't include this morning consult poll because they already did an updated one. But I guess Emerson. So overall, Trump is only up in Texas by about 4.5 points if we're looking at the 3 most recent polls. Again, I'm excluding ActiVote because I just think they're a terrible pollster, and their sampling is just awful, and they conduct polls with an app, so I wouldn't really consider them to be an actual poll. But according to the polls, Trump's ahead in Texas by 4.5%. So that is a lean Republican margin. Let's take a look at the state of Ohio. And we got a few polls. One with Trump up 11, Trump up 9, Trump up 8, Trump up 11 again, or up to 9 when you factor in leaners. And honestly, I will be factoring leaners here. But so far, Trump's ahead here by a likely R margin. If we average the polls out, he's up by 8 to 9%, which is likely Republican. Heading down to Florida next. Polls here have shown Harris catching up in this state, but it's still going to be pretty Republican state. But so far, according to the aggregate, that margin has come down quite a bit to an under 5% margin here in the state of Florida. So far, Harris appears to be doing quite well in the state, according to the few most recent polls. Trump only up by 2, 3, 1% in these latest ones. The Bullfinch poll is going to be probably very inaccurate because I think Trump probably carries Florida by a likely R margin. But according to the polls, he's only up by a lean Republican margin here. Okay, I think we could go to New Hampshire and Maine. So Maine, we got some decent polling out of this state. So far, Harris is up here by double digits, basically. She's leading by about a pretty sizable margin here. 17%, according to the most recent poll. And Maine second, we got polls here. Shows Trump up here narrowly, the most recent one. I'm kind of excluding this one. Maybe we could average it out, honestly, but I don't know, I think this poll is probably a more realistic one. This one is a month old, and the only statewide poll we have is a month old here. But I think I would just probably put it Maine second is likely Republican for the polling map. So let's back up to the actual map. Let's head to New Hampshire next. New Hampshire, so far Harris has a likely blue margin lead here. I don't believe they updated the more recent polls that have come out in New Hampshire, but we could just take a look at the aggregates here, and Harris is up by about 6 percentage points, according to all those aggregates factored in. So New Hampshire and Maine are both likely blue states, while Maine second is likely Republican. About what I expect to happen in these two states, so nothing really different there. I guess I'll head to Virginia next. And so far, Harris is up here by about an average of 7%, according to all the aggregates. There has been some polls that have it as a tie, but I've never really ever heard of Research America as a pollster before. ActiVote, we're not really factoring them in because I just don't like the sampling, like I said before. But so far, Harris is up by 7 in a morning consult poll. Emerson College has her up by 6 or 7 points if you factor in leaners, which I would. So 7-point lead makes sense here. But so far, there hasn't been any. I thought I always expect a little bit more closer polls here. But so far, Harris is up by about 7 points here. And even Lyric Clear Politics has her up by a likely blue margin. So this is a likely blue state as of right now, according to the polls. We'll head to North Carolina and Georgia next. North Carolina, we're going to take a look here. And this is a very narrow state. We have a lot of new polls that have come out that show a tie, or Harris narrowly leading, or Trump narrowly leading. So it's basically going back and forth here, which is kind of unlike Georgia. Georgia is actually more Republican than North Carolina right now, according to the polls, which you wouldn't expect after coming from 2020. But the race categorization that I would make it, according to the polls here, if we're just looking at all of them, is probably a tilt Republican rating because it is under 1%, and that's what the aggregates are mainly saying here. So Trump's narrowly ahead in the state of North Carolina, according to the polls. And Georgia, Trump's also narrowly ahead by a lean margin, but there has been a recent Fox News poll that has Harris up by 3, and I think that would probably be enough to knock it down to an only tilt Republican rating. Again, if we look at race to the White House, the Hill, DDHQ, that has Trump as a tilt Republican margin here. So far, I'd put this as a tilt Republican state according to the polls, just like North Carolina with that Fox News poll factor. And Fox News is actually a pretty good pollster when all is said is done. But North Carolina and Georgia are both tilt Republican according to the polls. Minnesota is up next, and so far Harris is leading here by about an average of 6 percentage points. So she has a pretty sizable lead here. There's only been one poll, which I honestly never heard of in bold research before. But so far, there's only been one poll that had her below a likely blue margin. But every other pollster said she's up by 5 or 6 points, which makes sense in the state of Minnesota. And now we're down to the Rust Belt 3, the states that decide the election. We'll head to Michigan first. So far, Harris polls the best in the state of Michigan. She's getting quite decent leads here. Trump hasn't led in a poll here for a while now, back in September 12th. That was the last time he led. He did tie in a few polls here and there. But so far, Harris is pulling away in the state of Michigan. She has a pretty sizable lead on average. She's up by 2.4 percentage points according to the aggregate, and the most recent polls here have her up by pretty decent margin. She's hitting that 50% number. So Michigan is lean blue according to the polls, which I expect her to be her best swing state, just because, again, they have a pretty sizable black population in Detroit that'll probably come out heavy for her in the state. So I think that definitely factors in. So let's head to the next few states. Wisconsin's up next. And so far, Wisconsin has been narrowing for a while now. We did get some polls out here. Rasmussen has it as a tie, narrow Trump lead in Emerson. Other polls have her up by likely blue margins, which is kind of interesting. But so far, according to the average, Harris is up here by an over 1% margin, probably like 1.5% just based on my estimates. But that is a lean blue margin for Harris in the state of Wisconsin. I don't think that'll actually happen. I think it's more likely to be a tilt blue state at this point in the election, but that's just what the polls are saying so far. And now we're down to the state that decides it all, Pennsylvania. I do think we're back to viewing Pennsylvania as a tipping point state. We were looking at Wisconsin there for a while after 2020. But again, most people think Pennsylvania is going to be the tipping point, and I think they're right. So let's take a look at Pennsylvania polls. And so far, they've been all over the place. There's been a ton of ties. You can just take a look here at all the pollsters that are probably hurting to get this tied result. But in general, Trump hasn't led in a lot of these polls. He's mainly been tying them, but sometimes he has a narrow Trump lead, like an insider advantage. But so far, Harris is actually up here by an over 1% margin of the polls. I was actually expecting it to be tilt blue with all these ties added in here. But so far, one poll has her up by 5. Another active vote, I'm not considering them. But even Rasmussen has her up by 1. Susquehanna polling has it as a tie. RMG has it as a tie. Emerson had it as a narrow lead if we factor in leaners, which I think is a good idea to factor them in. Mass Inc. also has it as a pretty sizable lead for Harris. So as of right now, Harris is up in Pennsylvania by a lean margin, according to the polls. I was expecting it to be tilt. But so far, Harris has a narrow advantage in the Electoral College, according to the polls. Georgia and North Carolina are extremely close to the tilt states. Arizona is kind of surprising to see as lean Republican. I would have thought it would have been tilt here. But there's only a few outliers, like Oregon, but that's just because of one poll conducted there. I'm interested to see what a New Jersey poll says, because we hadn't gotten polls out of that state. But this is just what the polls are saying in general, based on the map. So, and I also would like to cover the popular vote polls. So far, on average, we've taken the aggregate, she's up by 3.1%. And that's honestly enough for her to win. I think as long as she gets 2.5 percentage points, then she wins. She's more likely to win the Electoral College and Trump at the 2.5% threshold. But so far, the national polls are up by 3.1. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you're new to this channel and you enjoy content like this, I highly recommend subscribing. I'd greatly appreciate it. Other than that, I'll see y'all in the next one. Thanks for watching.